So I am at a loss for words. It's almost midnight here in South Africa, and my voice is a bit croaky because I'm sick. Fortunately, recovering. But I've been following the news for the last few hours about Charlie Kirk, and the confirmation just came through that he is in fact dead. That he was shot dead at an event in Utah earlier today, an event by Turning Point USA. And I want to share a few thoughts on that. So it would be an exaggeration to describe Charlie as a friend, because I didn't know him that well personally, but I did have the great privilege of not only following him for several years, but speaking with him and engaging with him earlier this year, where we had an interview about developments in South Africa and why it's important for America to take note of what is happening in South Africa. And we spoke for a bit. I can't remember if it was before or after the interview, sort of off air. And we agreed that we should do a follow-up interview, and that when I head to the States again, he invited me to go to his studio so that we could meet in person and have a more thorough, comprehensive conversation. And I did go back to the US after that interview, but we were not able to do the interview as we planned, for a reason that is very important and on a day like today very symbolic, that he was, during the time when I was there, when I was able to do the interview, on holiday with his family. And obviously he wasn't prepared to cancel his holiday to do an interview with me. But I've been exceptionally struck by this. Earlier today, I was very struck by the incident in Charlotte with Irina Zarutska, the Ukrainian-American girl who was so brutally murdered. And I made some remarks about that, saying that that video was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. And I immediately noticed how Charlie Kirk was on the front lines of that battle, talking about that, saying that her name should be remembered. And he was criticized for doing so by particularly CNN, who said that we need to understand the hurt that this murderer might have felt, that might have driven him to do this. And of course, Charlie did not back down. And so tonight or today, I'm not going to describe the entire event. I'm sure all of you or most of you watching this have seen it. I'm not going to try to give you an overview of the facts, because you can read that online. But of course, we're in a different time zone. I was just about to go to bed. I was putting my children to bed tonight. And my son was sitting next to me on my bed when the first video came through. It was one of the videos that was from a distance of Charlie being shot. And I was deeply struck and saddened by this. And I discussed it with my son, who asked me, what's going on? What happened? And he knew who Charlie Kirk was, of course. But and from that video, it seemed like a shot to the heart. And I thought, I can't imagine him surviving that. And then came the second video, which was one of those close-up videos, which I'm not going to describe now. And I was very surprised to hear that he was still alive. But I don't want to go into those details now. What I want to say is, this past weekend was my 40th birthday. I'm 40 years old today, or I've been 40 years old for a few days now. I'm older than Charlie. What was he? 31 years old, I think. And I felt it necessary to read a passage at my 40th birthday that is even more relevant now than it was this past weekend. So G.K. Chesterton said that the first poem that was ever written was also is the best poem that was ever written. And he spoke about the Iliad, of course, by Homer. And Chesterton remarked, of course, the story of Troy, the Greek invasion of Troy. And he made some very striking remarks about the Iliad. He said that, firstly, he said, if the world goes pagan and perishes, it would be an honorable death for the last person alive to read or to quote the Iliad and die, which of course is a very exaggerated way or spectacular way of putting it. But he goes on to explain some of the lessons we can learn from the Iliad. And he talks about the battle between Hector and Troy. Hector and Achilles. And as we know the story of Troy. We know who won that fight. Achilles won the fight. Hector was killed. He was slain in battle. Yet, G.K. Chesterton remarks that today we don't, even though Achilles won and Hector was killed, we want to be Hector. We want to be like Hector. We don't want to be like Achilles. And so people don't name their children Achilles, but we meet people all the time who are called Hector, who was named Hector. And part of the reason for that is Achilles was there for his own personal glory, while Hector was there to fight for the greater good. And so there's a section in the Iliad, which I have in my hand here, that I thought was really striking. It's a well-known passage in the Iliad where Hector has some form of an argument with his wife, Andromache. She is concerned that if Hector carries on like this, he would be killed. And she asks him to reconsider going to battle. But Hector is faced with this immense internal conflict because he wants to be with his wife and child or children. But he also has this urge to fight for his people, to go onto the battlefield. And so Andromache says to him, "Too daring prince, whither dost thou run? Art too forgetful of thy wife and son? And thinkst thou not how wretched we shall be, a widow I, a helpless orphan he? For sure such courage length of life denies, and thou must fall, thy virtues sacrifice. Greece in her single hero strove in vain, now hosts oppose thee, and thou must be slain. O grant me, gods, ere Hector meets his doom, all I can ask of heaven, an early tomb." And then Hector responds, and he's captivated by this internal friction of wanting to be with his family, wanting to be there all the time, but also feeling this desperate desire to step onto the battlefield and to do his part for his people. And Hector responds and he says, "My early youth was bred to martial pains. My soul impels me to the embattled plains. Let me be foremost to defend the throne and guard my father's glories and my own." And so I would love to read the whole passage, but I'm not going to do that right now. I want to say something about this because Charlie Kirk was an incredible person. He was very friendly when I met him. He was very engaged. He was very interested. and we only had the privilege of meeting online. But he was so influential, and I remember starting to follow him, I think back in 2018. And I remember watching an interview he did with Tucker Carlson in 2019, thinking, wow, he's pretty young, but he's so, not 2019, sorry, I think 2021, but he's so well read and versed and so well equipped for what he is doing. And Charlie Kirk became a legend. And he became a legend over time, but especially this year, where, for an example, just today, I had a conversation with some people about some of the lessons we can learn from Charlie Kirk and what he's been doing with Turning Point USA. And I think, as probably all men do, Charlie had this internal friction that Hector also had, where he was very clearly a person who deeply loved his family. And you can just see it from some of the few videos and photos that are available online of him with his family. And you could hear it in the way he spoke about his family. And it was clear that he wanted to be with them, but he also felt this deep urge or desire or calling, as Hector calls it, to go to the plains, to go to the battlefield, to take up arms in the proverbial battle, because that is indeed what is happening. We are in the fight of our lives. This is not just a battle of ideas. This is a battle for the preservation of civilization. That is what we are in. And it is not just a battle that is waged through arguments. It is a battle in which people are killed for making arguments. And it's unfathomable. And I don't want to make this video too long. I want to say one last thing, also with reference to a book, because I know Charlie was someone who deeply loved reading, and he also loved reading about the classics and, of course, Christianity in particular. And I thought tonight, while waiting for confirmation on what had happened to Charlie, expecting the news that he was in fact assassinated, I thought of the history of the church by Eusebius of Caesarea, or the church history, I think the book is also called. There are obviously different translations. It was originally written in Latin, and it was, as far as I know, the first book on the history of the church. And it predominantly deals with martyrdom, Christian martyrs. And I remember listening to it as an audiobook, and then buying the book and reading it again for a second time. And what struck me was, in the audiobook I listened to, the word fulfilled was used throughout the book. And I still want to count how many times. It must be 70 times or something. I don't know, like throughout. And it's especially used to describe the act of sacrificing your life for Christ and for the cause that you are fighting for. And in another translation, the translation I have in my hand, the word perfected is used. And it really struck me how Eusebius wrote of dying for your faith and dying for what you believe in as an act of fulfillment or perfection. And there are several parts in the book that I thought was really striking, but I want to read this one part where he spoke of a particular Christian martyr. He said, his meager body bore witness to what had occurred. It was all wounds and gashes and contorted, having lost its external human form. But in him, Christ suffered, accomplishing great glories, foiling the adversary and presenting a model for the rest. That there is nothing fearful where there is the love of the Father, nothing painful where there is the glory of Christ. And again, I'm tempted to read more from the book, but I'll leave it at that. Coincidentally, today I looked up the word Charlie, believe it or not, the name Charlie, to see what it means. And Charlie is derived, from what I could gather, from the German name, Karl, and it means free man. And Charlie today had a t-shirt with the word freedom on it. And he spoke about freedom while wearing this t-shirt, advocating for freedom and advocating against violence. And I believe the last word he said was the word violence. And then he was shot and killed. And I am truly, truly saddened by this. Speaking with Charlie was, as far as I'm concerned, one of the highlights of my professional career or life so far. And I want to express condolences to his family, to his loved ones. We are all truly saddened by this, but our sadness cannot compare to the sadness that they, or the grief that they must be experiencing. And I want to say that Charlie was like Hector, who, even though he was slain, we want to be like him. And Charlie was like the Christian martyrs described in Eusebius' church history, who became perfected or fulfilled through his sacrifice. And there's no point in saying that may he never be forgotten or may he always be remembered, because he will certainly always be remembered. And I can just imagine people wearing Charlie Kirk t-shirts with pictures of his face on it, people quoting, especially young people, quoting Charlie and so forth. And I think, as sad as we are, we need to remain convicted to carry on this torch that Charlie was carrying so bravely. Not to become afraid, because if we become afraid, then those who killed him or who support or relish in the killing of Charlie Kirk would win. So this is a time to be even more courageous, to be inspired by the courage of Charlie Kirk, and to go to these battlefields, the battlefields of our time, where we ensure that Christianity and our civilization, not just our civilization, but the very notion of civilization, is preserved. Because in many ways, what we see today is not just a clash between different civilizations, but a clash between civilization itself and barbarism. And we are on the side of Christ. We are on the side of Christianity. We are on the side of civilization. We are on the side of families. We are on the side of our nations, our cultures, our communities, and our traditions. And we are on the side of those who wish to pursue the good and those who seek the truth, and those, like Charlie, who are not afraid to speak the truth.